So I had a really interesting comment today on one of my videos that made me go out and test this to confirm for sure. But one of my viewers said in reference to me saying that Burnice simply doesn't need ERD6s as she doesn't really have any issues with energy management. And that while this might be true in a single target situation, they said that Burnice will lose her heat gauge incredibly fast in multi-target situations, and therefore she does need the ER. And for a second there I was like, wait, why didn't I think of that? Because it kind of does make sense. If she's spending 8 heat per afterburn, and we've got Scorch on 3 targets and your AoE or 3, do you now lose 24 heat? What about the internal cooldown or the ICD? Would it only proc off one target, or is the ICD shared across all targets? Or does each application of Scorch have its own Afterburn ICD? So let's go and answer all of these questions. But first, let's just quickly make sure that we're all on the same page on what ICD is and how it applies to Burnice. So ICD stands for internal cooldown, and in Burnice's case, we refer to it when talking about Burnice's off-field Afterburn procs. It's responsible for enforcing a minimum time between each afterburn proc in order to normalize the amount of procs that you can get across characters with varying attack speeds, so that characters with faster attacks don't get an innate advantage over those with a slower attack. We can see in the clip above that Nikamata, who attacks really fast, is triggering the afterburns at the same rate at which Ben does, who has the slowest attack in the game. What the above example also shows though is that while it does help prevent fast characters from getting faster procs, it doesn't help slower characters if their attack window is wider than that of the ICD itself, as can be seen when Ben does a jumping attack which causes him to now go out of sync with Nikamata. So knowing this, we want to test out how this ICD mechanic works when it comes to multiple enemies, and how that in turn affects Burnice's heat gauge management. So this is pretty easy to test. We know that in a single target situation with a full heat gauge, we're able to get off 13 afterburn procs before our meter depletes. So all we need to do is go into a multi-target fight and apply 3 Scorches and see what happens. So here are my targets that I've just applied Scorch to using EX skill. So I swap over Billy and I attack them, and we can see that we do get 3 afterburn procs. That's another second hit there for another 3, so that's 2 hits, 6 afterburns, 3 hits, 9 afterburns, and that's 4 hit for 12 afterburns. These 2 enemies actually die from the burn tick, so I only get 1 afterburn proc here from the pillar, but that's already 13 afterburns in 5 hits. So here's our 6th, our 7th, our 8th, our 9th, the enemy dies, and we're gonna go and reapply that Scorch. So that's 3 Scorches back again, which does refill our heat gauge just a little bit. That's 10, 11, 12, 13, and since we got that extra heat, that's 14. So there we go. We got 14 hits that triggered Afterburn, one of which was an extra Afterburn proc, since we did refresh our Scorch, which gave us a little bit more heat. And all up, that totaled 30 Afterburn procs from all of our multiple targets. So now we know that we can trigger multiple Afterburns on multiple targets using AoE attacks, and that it doesn't cost us any additional heat. Whether it's 1 target or 3 targets, a single activation of the ICD will cost us 8 energy. But how does that ICD work exactly? Let's take a closer look and see if it's a global ICD or if each application of Scorch gets its own ICD. So a really easy way to test this is by using a single target attack that gets quickly cancelled into an AoE attack, so that we can see if we can trigger 2 staggered afterburns on 2 targets. The way that I did this was by using Caesar's basic attack into her charge attack, which is a single hit into an AoE. If it's a global ICD, then we should get 1 afterburn proc on the first hit, and because the cooldown is still in effect, the AoE should trigger no afterburns even though we're hitting enemies with Scorch on them. If it's separate ICDs tied to each Scorch, then we should see some staggered afterburn procs. So here on screen I've got 3 targets with Scorch on them. Let's see what happens. I mean, the results there are pretty conclusive, but let's play it back in slow motion. So here we've got our first hit, which triggers the afterburn, and then our follow-up AoE attack does only physical damage to the rest of the enemies, even though we know for a fact that you can trigger multiple afterburns. Same thing here once again, afterburn on that first hit, and then nothing else on the AoE follow-up. And then finally, just to drive the point home, our attack here hits 2 enemies simultaneously, and it does trigger 2 afterburns, but the follow-up hit that hits the 3rd enemy does not cause an afterburn to occur. So there we go. To sum it up, we are able to cast Scorch on multiple enemies, and we're able to trigger an infinite amount of Afterburns at once for a single cost of 8 heat. However, the caveat is that this needs to occur simultaneously. Multiple Scorches share the same global ICD, so regardless of how many Scorches you have applied on the field, you will only get 13 activations of the ICD with a single heat gauge. And so to respond to the worries of my viewer at the start there, no, multiple enemies won't make you lose heat any faster, and while it's technically true that you might spend a little bit more energy applying Scorch to multiple enemies, as you saw there are numerous ways to efficiently apply Scorch to multiple enemies, or ways of incorporating Scorch application in your rotation that it honestly doesn't really matter that much.